Welcome to the Unit 9 review for AP Psychology exam. It happens to be Chapter 12 for us, Social Psychology. Let's get through it. Alright, so social psychology is exactly what you think it is, right? Psychology dealing with society and how we act in accordance to society and groups being an individual. Some definitions that we need to get out of the way. Sense of self. Guess what that is? There's no way I need to read that definition really, because it is literally the term. It is your sense of self. Okay? Social cognition. Okay. Cognition, what does it mean? Every time I see cognition, I think about thinking, I think about mental processes. So the mental processes people use to make sense out of their social environment. And then social influence. What in the world could that term mean? Oh yeah. How society and the situation affects us as an individual, how it influences us, okay? Person perception, this is kind of like how you perceive people and how other people perceive you. This is what this gets into. So this is the mental processes we use to form judgments and draw conclusions about the characteristics and motives of other people. Now, a lot of people say don't judge a book by its cover, but evolutionarily speaking, it is a crazy survival technique, right? To judge something as fast as you possibly can to make sure that it's not threatening and that you continue to live your life how you want to. You do judge people almost immediately, okay? And I know that we're taught not to, but that is something that we do. So person perception is an active, subjective process that always occurs in interpersonal context, right? Between you and another person. So forming rapid first impressions in a matter of seconds. Attractiveness, likability, competence, trustworthiness, and aggressiveness all has to be taken into account for very quickly for you to establish to whether or not this person can join your group or not, which will again increase your chances of survival. Remember, we're dealing with hundreds of thousands of years of evolution here. So 4 key components that influence your judgment. The characteristics of the person you are trying to evaluate, your own self-perception, your goals in the situation, and then the specific situation in which the process occurs. Now, something is huge here. The situation is almost the most powerful thing in every interpersonal contact that you have. All right? You could be in a certain role. I could be in a certain role. I could be a teacher, you could be a student, and then we fall into those roles, right? Or I'm the player, you're the coach, and we fall into those roles, whatever it is. You're the employee, I'm the employer, and you fall into those certain roles according to the situation. Social norms, the rules or expectations for appropriate behavior in a particular social interaction. You know how to act in certain social situations, right? I think about funerals a lot whenever I think about social norms, how to act there. That's kind of, I don't know where my mind goes. It's a little macabre, I know. All right, social categorization. So the mental process of categorizing people into groups or social categories on the basis of shared characteristics. So this is interesting. We'll get into prejudice and discrimination and all that kind of stuff. But you see these 2 hippies, right? These 2 hippies on the screen right now. Those aren't hippies. That's Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Okay? They looked like this at one point. They don't look like this anymore, right? If you looked at those people and you judged them, all right, you'd classify them into a certain group and probably give them characteristics of, pot-smoking, long-haired 70s hippies people. And maybe they were. But you don't see Bill and Hillary Clinton. All right, so explicit cognition is deliberate, conscious mental processes involved in perception, judgments, decisions, and reasoning. So taking a quick glance, you see gender, you see age, you see clothing, and then boom, you say they belong to this particular group. You categorize them. Implicit cognition happens unconsciously. So automatic, non-conscious mental processes that influence perceptions, judgments, decisions, and reasonings. Prior experiences weighing in on the perception of a person's weight, ethnicity, religious beliefs, political affiliation. It goes on and on. You know what I mean? So you those would be implicit. You don't necessarily have a conscious awareness of those things, but they're weighing on how you perceive these people, and they weigh on how you categorize those people. We'll talk more about implicit stuff here pretty much for the next 5 minutes. Implicit personality theory. So this is a theory where a network of assumptions or beliefs about the relationships among various types of people, traits, and behaviors. So assuming that certain types of people share certain traits and behaviors, which is pretty false. Even if you group somebody, if you get a giant group of the same, whatever, type of person, it could be anything, and they are not part of your group, and you're just looking at that group, you actually assume that all of them have similar traits, which is very, very wrong. In an in-group setting, the people in the group are actually vastly different. Okay? And so you just make these assumptions, and it could lead you down the wrong path. So your schemas about certain characteristics, and remember, schemas is just a mental category in your mind that you've built over time. I like to think about mammals whenever I think about schemas. And then over time, you realize that several different things that aren't the same happen to be mammals. Right? You build that over time. All right, in childhood, most people are bombarded with the thing called beauty equals good. This is implicit bias, kind of. So as a result, most people have an implicit personality theory that associates physical attractiveness to a wide range of desirable characteristics. What is physical attractiveness? I mean, you can get into it a little bit, but like symmetry and, sometimes eye color and stuff like that. But like it goes back again to evolutionary types, things. But decades of research show that attractive people are perceived as being more intelligent, happier, better adjusted than other people. But are they actually happier? Research says yes. Why? Because they're afforded opportunities because of their attractiveness. So improved economic outcomes, higher salaries and more successful spouses, high self-esteem, intelligence, and other desirable personality traits. Reasons stem from receiving more attention and more favorable treatment from other people because of their attractiveness. I mean, this guy right here that we can see on our screen, that's his mugshot. He was a criminal. Felonies. And all of a sudden his mugshot gets put out there and then becomes a meme, and now what is he? He's a model. He's a successful, rich model. His attractiveness actually afforded him opportunities out of the criminal life. Okay? So obviously this can be wrong, right? This is a sweeping general conclusion about attractiveness, all right? But again, it's just limited information, so we can't necessarily make really informed decisions about it. But it is a natural, adaptive, and efficient cognitive process that has evolved with people over time in order to survive. Remember, that is the name of the game. That is survival. We just don't even, again, in the last 10,000 years, things have kind of changed for the humans, but nothing has changed with our brains or anything like that. We still understand the world how we would 100,000 years ago when it comes to our evolutionary stride. All right, attribution. I love teaching about this. So the mental process of inferring the causes of people's behavior, including one's own. This also refers to the explanation made for a particular behavior. So one of my favorite terms is the fundamental attribution error. And that is basically attributing something, a particular behavior of another, right, not you, but another person, to internal personal characteristics while ignoring everything else that could probably have an effect on it, like the situation or the circumstances or prior experiences leading up to this particular behavior. So, one of my favorite things to even mention here is somebody pulling out in front of you or cutting you off on the road. What would you call somebody like that? You'd probably call them an idiot, or like a dumb butt. Learn how to drive. you would say something. Road rage would come out when you got cut off, right? So what happens here is you attribute their decision and their behavior to their personal characteristics. But in reality, there was a bush in front of them and they couldn't see. It was the situation that they were in. They're not dumb. They just couldn't necessarily, maneuver or manipulate the situation at hand to where they couldn't pull out in front of you, and it was an accident, and it's not because they were dumb, it's just because they really couldn't see that well. That's fundamental attribution error. Some different types of this kind of is like blaming the victim, which happens a lot these days, right? The tendency to blame an innocent victim of misfortune for having somehow caused the problem. The one that really kills me, which is it's really, really sexist, but she shouldn't have dressed that way. That kills me. I don't know. That's blaming the victim. Okay, that's an example of that. Hindsight bias, you've heard of this maybe before. It's a cliche. Hindsight's 20/20, right? You have perfect vision when looking backwards because you knew it was going to happen after it happened. So that's what hindsight bias is. And then just world hypothesis is something that I think you kind of believe in when you're younger, and then all of a sudden you get older and you're like, oh yeah, that's right, the world isn't like this. So this is the assumption that the world is fair, and that therefore people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. The world isn't like that. And honestly, I always tell people this: you didn't play baseball if you think this. The world's not fair. Baseball's not fair. You fail more than you succeed. And karma, you can think about it if you want. We can go get matching tats on our forearms. Karma. And then somebody can get the other part of that saying over here. We can do this. No. The world isn't fair. You live in this world of randomness that just happens. Do you get to control a lot of it? Yeah, I'd say so. You get to make decisions and all that kind of stuff. But, the world isn't fair. A person can get something and you'd be like, that's not fair. You can say that all you want, but who cares? Nothing's going to change. So that's the just world hypothesis. Here's some awesome infographics and graphic organizers for you to look at your own time. All right, self-serving bias. So we have a tendency to take credit for our successes by attributing them to internal personal causes, along with a tendency to distance ourselves from our failures by attributing them to external situational causes. Like, oh my gosh, I succeeded. That was the hard work that I put in. Oh, I failed. That teacher really sucks. You get that? You've probably felt that before. Self-serving bias. Then self-effacing bias, which is called the modesty bias. We tend to blame ourselves, and again, let's just say self-serving bias happens in individualistic cultures, which is the United States, right? And self-effacing, the modesty bias, happens in collectivistic cultures, where the group is more important than the individual. So we tend, in the self-effacing bias, we tend to blame ourselves for our failures, attributing them to internal personal causes, while downplaying our successes by attributing them to external situational causes. So here's a great example of this. I love these types of players. Where they own their failure, they understand it, and they learn from it. And then self-effacing bias on the opposite side, whenever the team succeeds, right? They don't think it's necessarily because of something that they did. It's because of the team itself, right? The external situational causes that dictated our victory or success. That's awesome. I love that. Attitude, what a huge thing. If you took the 12.1 quiz, it had everything to do with Daniel and his white vans. Do you remember Daniel and his white vans? Back at it again? Yeah, I made that quiz right after that happened. So all of it has to deal with how, yes, back at it again with the white vans. I love how he says that. All right, attitude, a learned tendency to evaluate some object, person, or issue in a particular way. Such evaluations may be positive, negative, or ambivalent. So we have the cognitive component, the emotional component, and the behavioral component. And if you look here, you know, in this graphic organizer, it has an example of Jill. Jill has a negative attitude towards fast food restaurants. And then it goes through each one of those components. Okay, so, you know, her thoughts, right, her beliefs, that's the cognitive component. The emotional component, her feelings about the certain situation, or the object, or whatever it is. And then the behavioral component, how Jill would act towards fast food restaurants. So, you know, I think mine with the white vans had to deal with all three of those things in the quiz. All right, the social psychology of attitudes. Not necessarily anything that sticks out here that you need to know for the AP exam, but just to talk about it really quickly, hazardous attitudes, the anti-authority attitude, don't tell me what to do, and the antidote for that is to follow the rules. They are usually right. Occasionally you do need to break the rules, we know that, but if you do that, you know, anti-authority, you know, hazardous attitude, where, you know, you kind of look like a fool, that's anti-authority. Impulsivity, right, do something quickly. The antidote, not so fast, think first. Invulnerability, it won't happen to me, which I thought about the second vaccine shot. It's like, I'm not going to get sick. I don't get sick. And I was sick for 2 days. The antidote for that feeling is to think it could happen to me. Macho, I can do it. And then the antidote, taking chances is foolish. Resignation, what's the use, right? Why would I even do this? I'm not helpless, I can make a difference. So attitude's huge. You know, it's going to affect your behavior the entire time. You know, I've heard a quote before, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% about the attitude that you take with those things that happen to you. You know, and I tend to agree with that. All right, effects of behavior on attitude. So cognitive dissonance, this is something we've actually talked about quite often, but cognitive dissonance, if you remember, is the internal imbalance of what you feel should happen, your expectations and your thoughts about a certain thing, and then the reality of what truly happens. And they don't match up. I'm a good person, but I got caught cheating on my girlfriend last week. You get what I'm saying? Like, I can tell myself that I'm a good person, but I did this thing that good people don't do. You know what I mean? And when that happens, it creates this thing that humans hate, which is internal tension. We leave homeostasis, we create this stressful response, and all of a sudden we're feeling weird. That's cognitive dissonance. Okay? The weirdest part about this thing with cognitive dissonance is that if you really want to experience growth, experience cognitive dissonance. That's when growth really happens. That's when learning could possibly really happen in a real world situation where things didn't quite go as they planned. So you then think, okay, well, how do I get things to go as planned? Philip Zimbardo, I'm not going to go over this, but it's a Stanford prison experiment. You know a little bit about it. Again, the situation is super powerful, and people fall into roles. Even when it was a fake situation, they fell into a prison guard or they fell into the inmate, and they fell hard. Okay, this is probably the most popular living psychologist at the moment, Philip Zimbardo. Understanding prejudice, if you know anything about this, you probably should. So prejudice is obviously thoughts about a group of people, like, you know, a negative attitude towards them. Then discrimination, that's actually acting on it. All right, a stereotype, you know what that is as well. It's a mental shortcut that we make about people. And then stereotype threat is you hearing something about yourself and it causing you not to reach your full potential. Like my favorite stereotype threat ever is white men can't jump. So if I was told that my entire life, I would never try to dunk, right? Or, you know, you have the adversarial look at it and you're like, okay, well, I'll dunk then. So in-group versus out-group. In-group is us. That would be, you know, the group that you belong to. So in-group bias, the tendency to judge the behavior of in-group members as favorable and out-group members as not. So the example that you get right here is, you know, we're playing capture the flag. We're tactful, and the other team doing the exact same thing that we're doing, they're sneaky. Right? In-group versus out-group. Out-group, them, a social group to which one does not belong. The out-group homogeneity effect, that's the tendency to see all members of the out-group as very similar, but I just told you that's not the truth. Okay? And then ethnocentrism, we've gone over before. It's judging other cultures by your own and thinking that your own is the best. Americans do that a lot. Implicit attitudes is just attitudes you have about things that you don't know that you have about things. I took this test at UNCW once before. It's so funny. You find out if you're an ageist or not. And you click these buttons, you know, and you pair these words and these faces with each other, and then all of a sudden the test comes back and they're like, you hate old people. You're like, what? I didn't even know this was what the test was. I was just looking at these people's faces and pressing these buttons. But as teachers, we we go through tons of implicit bias training to where, you know, it's like don't let your unconscious bias come out in class against students who, you know, they would feel it, but you would never know that you were even saying it. Overcoming prejudice, Robbers Cave experiment. This is Muzaffar Sharif. 22 boys. They get divided up into two groups. They create hostility. Young go. Yeah, so we've gone over this before. 3 types or 3 stages. So group identification, group competition, and group cooperation. What this guy comes up with is called the realistic conflict theory, and this is so easy to understand. In a world of limited resources, and if there are groups, people will fight over those resources. That's so easy, right? I mean, think about a baseball game or any game. At the end of the game, there's this thing that people get, which is a win. And there's 2 groups, and they fight over it. The same thing with coal. The same thing with oil. Like, same thing with it. In a world of limited resources, conflicts arise between groups. Jigsaw classroom technique. You guys have been a part of this before. It's something that teachers do. You basically go, you become a part of a group, you learn about something, and then you bring it back to your home-based group and you teach them. It's good for stopping, you know, group identification